Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another CER Action Series, number 7. For us, it is great to see all of you out there, and we are very excited to come to you again today with some amazing, unique, and I might say, if you don't mind, incredibly intelligent and attractive men today. I'm just throwing it out there. So we're going to get underway in just a minute with our first guest, who's probably laughing at me right now, Kevin Chavous. But before I do, a couple of little housekeeping points. First, I'm Jeannie Allen, and you've got my Twitter name, hopefully in your screen. Please tweet at us. Note us on Facebook, share your questions in the Q&A we've made available, not chat, throughout the program, and we will get to them in the course of our business. If you have any issues or problems, put them there, and our team, our amazing team at CER, will get to you as soon as possible. We do this because we believe every child in America should have access to education no matter where they are. No matter what their circumstances, whether it's not a crisis or it's a crisis. And the last 6 weeks, we have brought to our friends and colleagues across the US and globally examples and exemplars of amazing people doing fantastic things in spite of it all. And so today is no different with our guests. But before I get there, I've also promised that weekly we would be profiling a book. And many of you remembered that I started 3 weeks ago now, with my book, An Unfinished Journey, Education, the American Dream, still available on Amazon. Last week, we profiled a great book by Tim Roche called A Fine Line, which actually explores education by zip code, which is not a good thing. Today, I am highlighting a book that some of you may have read. It's not quite an oldie but goodie. It is a goodie, but it's 2012, and it's the first book from our first guest, Kevin Chavous. It's called Voices of Determination, Children That Defy the Odds. I had the pleasure of watching Kevin as he wrote this amazing book. Sorry, my green screen is not letting you see the whole thing, but it will be up on our Twitter feed. And Kevin, you're laughing. I love this book so much. And it's got a foreword by Jeff Canada. Welcome, my friend. Let's see his beautiful real life face, Teddy. Thank you so much for being with us today. Kevin Chavous is the president of K-12, president of academics, policy, and schools at K-12. He's also a member of the CER board of directors, so I'm a little bit biased, but when I wanted to make sure I had people who not only were savvy political and practitioners and smart as wit people, Kevin was the first person I called. K-12, as some of you know, is a leading technology-based education company. Kevin oversees all the services the company provides. But I met him when he was running the education committee of the DC City Council. He was instrumental in bringing about new thought, new thinking, new change making in Washington, DC that has helped reinvigorate the nation's capital and taken it from a place that most people didn't want to live to one where people can't get out and are dying to get in here. So with that, Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, we've known each other a long time. You look the same. I don't. So what's with that? I don't know. I don't get that.
Well, you've got your COVID beard too working.
I do. So good to be with you, Jeannie.
You too. Now, did I surprise you about your book?
No, I mean, yes, you did surprise me, but you're right in as much as you and I were talking the whole time. I was telling you I want to do this book and feature these stories. I'm tired of just the policy discussions. As you know, one of my biggest concerns and criticisms of our movement, those of us who are involved in educating kids, is too often we look at it as numbers on a page. And I wrote that book really just to tell the stories of kids, 10 kids who overcame incredible challenges because they were determined to get their education. And far too many administrators may look at them as just another number on the page.
Who was the boy you told me about that I'll never forget? I didn't look it up this morning. The one who stayed in the rafters in school at
Isn't
night?
that it's incredible? You know, I will say that I changed the locations and the names, but it was a young man who the administrators found was living in his high school because he was homeless. He'd had challenges with his mother. His father was in jail, and he was just a couple months away from graduating, 3 months away. He had nowhere to go. He didn't want to go in the foster care system because he was determined he was going to be the first one in his family to graduate from high school. He was going to go to the military. So he literally was staying in the roof of his high school. And the janitor found out because they followed him down the hall. He was always at the school. It would be the girls' basketball practice. He'd be in the gym watching and cheering the girls on. It'd be a community meeting. He would be there. And one night, a janitor and a counselor followed him down the hall, up the steps to the roof, and saw hangers on pipes. And he was living in his school.
Oh gosh.
Incredible story.
I'll never forget
But
that story.
but that kid made it. He did it.
It's amazing. So, Voices of Determination, Children That Defy the Odds, pick it up. You will want to pick this up as well as his novels. But this isn't about you, Kevin. But it is about the great work that you have been doing and leading. And I say that with all honesty. I have been mesmerized by the transformation of so much of the work that you've been doing. And so, why don't we just start off by you sharing with some of the folks out there from all over the country, all different walks of life, what it is that you guys did and do at K-12 on a regular basis, but did to kind of address this crisis, because that's really what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, well, K-12 has been in existence for 20 years. It started out as a company that really was a curriculum company that tailored its offerings toward homeschool parents. And by the way, the definition of homeschool has now totally changed. The old traditional definition is that parents took full custody and control of their kids' educational experience. There were no teachers other than the parent, and they used curriculum to help with that. And over time, though, as these opportunities emerged state by state, more and more school districts and more families saw the virtual experience as a way to help educate kids that may have challenges and couldn't thrive in a brick and mortar environment. Kids who, suffer from autism, kids who had medical, physical challenges. So over the last 10 years or so, K-12, the demographic of K-12 students have changed from kids who a lot were sort of self-starters, academically driven, to those who have a lot of challenges. So, it's an interesting mix. And what we do is we provide full-time online virtual education opportunities for 120,000 kids around the country. We also provide curriculum and teaching, training, and support to over 2,000 school districts in the country. And as you might imagine during this time, Jeannie, we are obviously, since we're the nation's leader in offering these kind of services, we're having a lot of exposure because parents are looking for alternative options to help them and help guide them through this troubling and challenging time.
So are they doing it individually? Are they coming to you, or are they going through schools somewhere? Kind of who's part of the K-12 delivery system?
It's a great point. So we get our students through a number of different means. Some school districts will refer kids to us. Some school districts view us as a form of alternative education for kids who can't thrive in a brick and mortar environment. But the largest share of our students come from parents who call our enrollment line because they either, the brick and mortar environment their kid is in doesn't work for them, or they're looking for some more personalized educational experience.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, I listen to enrollment calls all the time, Jeannie. I am surprised by how many, almost half of the parents who call our enrollment line call because their kids are bullied. And it's all about safety. And there is a growing number of families out there with the school shootings, the natural disasters from hurricanes and fires, and now with COVID, a lot of families are deathly afraid for their kids' safety. And we get a lot of calls along those lines. And, you know, when they sign up with us, and we're in over 30, 35 states, we have full-time teachers that can work with them in their live class connect sessions with peers in like a Zoom setting. Then they have individual instruction that takes place. And then they have individual time where they have to work on their courses. And then they have to take tests like every other student would in any other traditional educational classroom. And it does work. I mean, for a lot of kids who cannot thrive in that traditional setting, the kids that we serve really enjoy the experience.
You know, I have to tell you, there's all these misunderstandings or misnomers, if you will, around online, which is part of the reason we really wanted you to help educate us. And some of the discussion out there now, I mean, obviously this is not easy for anyone who's never pursued this naturally, that didn't call you because something was happening or just didn't need that difference. So I won't even just say alternative, but didn't need the different thing from what they typically get, right? But there's this impression that the student, and this would be really hard for the student that doesn't have the people around, the student's just sitting at a desk, looking at a screen, trying to figure it out on their own. And one thing you said to me in our prep call the other day is you started talking to me about kind of the training and the interaction. And I just think, you know, this is not purely subjective, but I just think for folks out there, they need to understand the granularity between the process of education that's going on so they can make an informed decision. So help us with
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And keep in mind that teaching in a virtual classroom is an art form. And I will venture to say that a great teacher in a brick and mortar classroom can be a great teacher in a virtual classroom as well, but they need the training. And chances are, if you don't get that training, you will not be a great teacher if you migrate from brick and mortar to the virtual classroom. So what does that training look like? Well, we've established a partnership with Southern New Hampshire University. So we purposely had them work with us and look at hundreds and hundreds of hours of some of our best teachers, some of our worst teachers, if you will. And we now develop a rubric for what an effective teacher looks like in a virtual education classroom. And we offer training. And by effective teacher, it means how do you engage students? Because a lot of people feel like it's sort of a myth that, one parent said to me, working class parent in Arizona, well, I was a little concerned. I want a computer teaching my kids. Well, actually, a computer won't teach your child because there is a trained teacher who knows how to engage students, who knows how to group kids according to proficiency level. If you have a computer screen in our Class Connect sessions, our best teachers are able to group kids in a box for group of kids who have some of the bigger challenges, kids who are at task, kids who are advanced, and then through peer-to-peer interaction, moving kids from one box to the next, engaging in the use of creative technologies. A lot of our classes now are using artificial intelligence, virtual reality. We engage in gamification. So when kids are studying and they're doing a math problem or being quizzed to test their analytical comprehension on a reading program, then they'll get badges and coins, similar like the video games when they go to the next level, all with an eye toward making sure that this is an engaging, exciting, and frankly, fun experience. And I do think that, Jeannie, the last point, which is really a big one, it's sometimes hard for us who went through the traditional experience to understand that the world of education is going through a huge migration. We're going from a migration where the teacher was the end-all, know-all, be-all, the deliverer of content. And in classrooms you and I sat in, we had to listen to the teacher, write what the teacher said down, and then be tested on it based on what the teacher told us. But now, the future of education, this is the content holder right here. Kids don't need a deliverer of content in the old traditional teaching way. They need a guide, someone who can help them manage through the fog of information out there. And through our virtual experience in training the teachers that help kids in terms of having a personalized learning experience and managing the content that's out there, it's a wholly different experience. And I also think that for the kids who have been through it, and when it's done the right way, it's mutually rewarding because they have become a part of a learning community where it's fun as opposed to the drudgery of, well, I don't know if it works for me. And again, I'm not saying that all brick and mortar classrooms are like that. There's some great brick and mortar, a whole lot. But I do think that in terms of meeting kids where they are, this merging of technology and
with
best
individualization,
individualization, that's the future. That's the future.
Can be happening. I was chuckling too as you were talking about the class you sit in where they talk at you and you respond. And then I was going to say, and some of us get kicked out because we don't respond fast enough. I don't know about anyone else.
Or maybe like you, Jeannie, you were responding too much. You were trying to teach the class for the teacher, and that's probably why they kicked you out.
That is the problem. Kevin, if somebody, one of the questions out there, and I think this is important, it comes up every single time, is about special needs. How could you possibly teach special needs? So is there a response to that? And then also we've got a couple of people, and I know we're going to take questions later, but I just think it's important now. What's the teacher rubric you're referring to? Kind of, and how do you share that? Or is that only for the teachers going through the Southern Hampshire program?
Well, we actually are offering free teaching webinars is part of our response to COVID. We've done it for school districts. We've done it for individual teachers. Great. So we offer that in our website under our, if you just k12.com and look at our COVID response, you can get links to some of our webinars on teaching practices. A number of teachers have availed themselves of that, and they really are excited to learn about this new approach. In terms of special needs, I can tell you with the challenges that we have, because only 15% of our students who enter our schools are at grade level when they first join. If they're with us for 3 years or more, then they see dramatic increase. But a lot of them are behind. But the one area where we really have phenomenal success is special education. And it makes sense if you think about it, because our program is sort of grounded on the belief that personalized learning is the key. And when you have an individual education plan, an IEP, then it calls out for a personalized learning experience. So online, we have a lot of kids with IEPs. Our special ed compliance is really phenomenal around the country. And that's because teachers are able to engage students one-on-one and help them, guide them through the best way to use the technology to get them and keep them excited about learning. And at the same time, make sure that they're growing academically at the pace that is dictated by whatever their challenge is.
So I don't know what happened to his face.
Yes.
Oh, there you are.
I'm back. Yes.
So I don't know that, you guys didn't have to really change a lot, right? Because you were already doing this, whereas everybody else had to scramble to figure out what remote looked like. Is there anything differently that you did that's, because of COVID, or were you just kind of business as usual, if you will?
Well, we did not have to change anything that we do substantively. We just want to make sure that we do it better and make sure we can absorb the scale, which really leads me to, the challenges that I know that school districts are having. And I say quite candidly, I've spoken, to a lot of people and a lot of interviews on this, that, the three areas where school districts are having the most challenges are areas that we have dealt with every day and we continue to improve upon. uh, because of the number of kids we serve. One is having a secure platform. Many school districts who don't have a robust online offering, if they don't have a secure platform, even in these Zoom calls now, you read and hear about, hackers jumping in. You have to make sure that your IT infrastructure is strong enough to have secure platforms for thousands of kids to use it with teachers at the same time. And many school districts don't have that. So they need to have a secure platform. Second, they need to have right content. School districts are used to having curriculum for math or English or fifth or sixth grade, what have you. But the curriculum has to be adaptable to the online experience. Our curriculum is tailor-made so that, and we have what we call a recommender. So when a kid is reading, let's say it's fifth grade English class, if the kid seems a little stuck or something, then there's a pop-up that says, oh, it looks like you may have a question here, and they'll send them to some other link that will help explain the passage a little easier. This idea of having curriculum that's tailored toward, the virtual world is something that school districts need to really prepare for, and I think develop more fully. But probably the most important thing is something I touched on earlier, and that is teacher training. As I said, a great teacher in brick and mortar can be a great teacher online, but a great teacher in brick and mortar who isn't trained to teach online will not be a great teacher. And we're seeing that with these. There's some examples where school districts are doing it well, but all too often you hear the stories of a teacher gives a PDF to kids. We'll talk about it in a couple of weeks. That isn't great teaching online. And I think that this teacher training is something that school districts need to really, really focus on. Because my fear is that many schools will not open in September. They may not open till January. And, we really have to make sure that our kids are still learning, even while we go through this national crisis.
So have you seen a difference in school districts that step up to the plate and those who don't? What are the distinguishing characteristics between those who are calling you and others, or those who are just kind of sitting waiting for, like, this too shall pass?
Well, a number of schools, to their credit, a number of school districts, a number of private schools, a number of charter schools had some type of online offering beforehand. So they were forward looking and they're doing much better. I mean, folks like Eva Moskowitz. I mean, she had an online, and I talked to Eva about a year and a half ago about what she was doing, what we were doing. We shared information, best practices, if you will. And she hasn't missed a beat. And there are a couple other school districts that have done that. But those where there's sort of the feeling that they can go back to the way it always has been, it's just not feasible. And if you have your head stuck in the sand, there is a new normal. And I actually think, in terms of where we're headed, that even if schools, let's say every single school district opens in the fall, what if there's an outbreak in October with the fifth grade teacher in your school?
Right.
I mean, so you have to, I think, in terms of emergency planning and preparedness, I think school districts need to have a solid, clear plan on how they deal with the platform issues, deal with curriculum issues, and train teachers, even if they know they're going to open in the fall. And secondly, I think that the ultimate end game for education is probably a more hybrid form of blended. Because if there is an outbreak and you can't have 20 kids or 25 kids in class, maybe you have 10 or 12, then you're talking about rolling enrollments where some kids come in the morning, some in the afternoon, they're 6 to 10 feet apart. And then when they're not in school, they're learning online. It's blended. Right. I think that ultimately that's where education may be headed, because the personalized learning experience where teachers are guides and not content deliverers is ultimately where kids are going to want to be.
And expand on the future, the future vision a little bit too, Kevin. When I think about when I was raising my kids, like most parents, we all cry at snow days. right? And especially if you're in the Washington area and you have a snow day for 1 inch of slush. But we used to think to ourselves like, okay, you've been out of school now a few days, you've lost that time and you've got to make it up at the end. So when I hear you talking and when I think about the conversations we're all having across the country, and some of us are throwing out crazy and big ideas like having a backpack attached to every child and they show up someplace, how difficult is it to just simply say, okay, the fifth grade teacher, God forbid, has a fall, gets COVID and can't stay in the classroom. Why can't kids just transition to still learning? Like, what does that take physically to get that student just to kind of not skip a beat?
Yeah, and that's why I think this is where the planning is so important. You can't turn a switch off and on to make it happen, which I think that's why so many school districts have been caught unaware,
Right.
because they're used to moving in the same way, in the same pace, the same approach. But what needs to happen, frankly, is that part of the planning has to be that you will have, each school district should commit to some type of online experience for children. And I think that they should socialize that or begin to engage in that in fall, even if their doors are open and all the kids come in, because when there is that national crisis or the health scare or the national disaster or some crazy thing in this crazy world we're in now, learning should keep going. And the only way it's going to keep going is if you have the infrastructures in place from a technology point of view, from a skilled teacher
Right.
training point of view, and the wherewithal for students to avail themselves of it. Now, one big barrier that we've got to deal with, and you have been out in front on this for many years, is the broadband issue and the internet deserts,
Right.
because there are a lot of rural folks in rural America and in parts of some urban areas where they aren't wired and don't have the technology. And I think that what I have said publicly is, there should be the federal government, in part of its emergency preparedness planning and infrastructure readiness that has become a commitment to the Congress and the government has made since 9/11, that we have to make sure our infrastructure needs are met in the wake of any crisis. Part of that should be just broadband, closing the gap. That's an education equity issue. And I think there should be dedicated stimulus funding to make sure that each state closes that gap, working with certain technology companies so that all of America is wired, because all of America needs access to technology going forward.
Absolutely. And you just answered one of the questions. And speaking of which, why don't we bring in my friend and colleague, Michael Musanti? You know him, you love him, to help with
Yes.
some of the questions. But as he's coming on, let me just, reflect on that for a second. There's all this stimulus money in states, Kevin, and I'm hearing even the governors with the most progressive thinking around them kind of aren't really knowing what to do with it. And so I fear that unless there's some real, determination to help them understand that, yes, they should be funding those gaps, not just funding the systems, right? Because we know a lot of people, and this is a bipartisan conversation, right? You've been around lots of different people, parties, but there are a whole bunch of people just demanding that we
Right,
send
right,
money to the systems. So
right.
how do we solve that?
Yeah, I think that similar to Race to the Top, if you recall, where everyone said we're going to use this money a certain way, but it ended up being sort of a catch-all to fund teachers and fund pay raises and fund infrastructure needs that, the Fed just said, just here, take the money. I
Hmm.
think that we've seen some of this with the CARES money and the stimulus money, because school districts know they're going to be facing a deficit. Those deficits could be anywhere from 5 to 20, 25% of their budgets. and they're a little afraid of what that will look like. And for that reason, I think that the feds were hesitant to put strings on the money that they gave to the states. To me, I think that's okay to a point, but there should be some strings attached to infrastructure preparedness. I mean, they've got to get teachers trained
Yeah.
on how to teach online. They've got to make sure that they cure the broadband gap out there. They've got to make sure that these platforms are secure. And I think that any school district that hasn't thought about those things or isn't moving toward those things, that they're not going to close their budget gap without having those things addressed, because they won't be able to keep the students they have. Parents will not, their polls are already showing parents are not going to send their kids back to schools where they feel they're not safe. And last thing I'll say, Jeannie, look, you and I have been in the parent choice, school choice world for a long time. I think that one of the impacts of the COVID crisis, and particularly the fact that many parents are not going to accept what the government tells them is okay for their kids, if they don't feel like it's okay from a safety point of view. I think we may be on the verge of the biggest explosion of parent choice in history, because parents are now more educated consumers. They're going to be looking to see if they don't feel like that the school district has created an environment to ensure their kids' safety. If they don't feel like their kids, that the school district isn't ready to teach their kids online, or at least some form of fashion, or provide or something beyond just giving them PDFs. And again, some are already doing that. But if parents don't feel that way, then they're going to start looking for alternatives. And doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a virtual online provider, but they're going to be looking for those educational options that will help their kids learn.
And asking, why isn't this happening? I heard it's happening elsewhere. And that's the
Yes.
key, which parents don't typically have the luxury of being able to ask because they're busy and they just expect someone else to take care of it.
Yep, that's right.
Michael, welcome.
Yes. Hello, Kevin.
Hey,
Great
Michael.
to see you as
Great
always.
to see you.
Hello,
Yes.
Jeannie. Kevin, I'm going to try to bundle these. You have spurred a great creative response here. We have a lot of questions for you. So Larry Williams writes, Kevin, you wrote an op-ed published April 24th in Washington Examiner about traditional schools having not reached out to K-12. Have things changed for K-12 since that op-ed was published? And schools have gone ahead and closed campuses? And if you could couple that with a question from Kim Scott, how well has K-12 served charter school communities? And I will have to ask you to give me Reader's Digest so we can get to all of the questions that have been raised for you.
Well, what our chairman and CEO, Nate Davis, did, and I followed up with that, as soon as COVID hit, we issued a press release and a link to our website where we offer things for free. We offered teaching webinars, because we know that we're working with Southern New Hampshire University. We're working with that university, and we offer the only master's in virtual education teaching in the country. The only place you can get a master's in teaching on virtual education online is through Southern New Hampshire University. I'm sure that will change in the wake of this. So, but because of the studies that we've done, we do have some expertise. So we wanted to at least offer free training for teachers. And many school districts are now availing themselves of that, where they tune into our webinars and they're working with us. And the other thing we offered was access to our curriculum and our sort of reading list through Big Universe. We have 17,000 books for elementary school kids that's available online that we offered to families. And several families and several school districts have availed themselves of that. So yes, people are beginning to respond largely to a lot of our free offerings, which is what we felt needed to happen. And we still feel that way. I think that the next level of focus for school district leaders and school board reps and superintendents is to really, get together and figure out a plan, a solid, cogent plan of operation going forward that encompasses the things I talked about earlier that will help prepare kids in the future. And your other question, Michael?
Oh, charter schools. How well have they served charter schools?
Well, we work a lot with a lot of charter schools in the states where we operate. Probably 65% of our relationships are with charter school, nonprofit charter school operators, where we are the vendor and we provide, everything from soup to nuts, the teachers, the curriculum, the training, the operational, financial support, all of that, government affairs support, all of that we will do based on our contractual relationship with charter schools. And then a growing number of our relationships are with school districts. I mean, we have a lot of school district relationships around the country where they want to stand up a virtual program and they call on us to put it together and in effect run it. But it's all based on partnerships. Our relationship with school districts and with charter schools is a partnership relationship where we want to work with those folks in a way that benefit kids.
How does K-12 plan on balancing or measuring loss of learning coming up, which is a critical point on a lot of people's minds?
Wow, great question. This is tough because we know that even under the best of circumstances, these schools that have had to migrate overnight to an online educational offering, that kids are going to have a growing deficit. And that when kids start in the fall, we know that many kids will have lost some learning time and will be behind. So we're beefing up a lot of things, our SEL focus. We're doing more professional development for teachers on how to engage students who suffer from trauma and poverty, and also what kind of supports do we need for teachers. Let's say a typical classroom teacher has 50, 60 students in online settings, 70 students, whatever it may be, and that maybe 30 or 40% of them are behind. Well, that could grow to 50 to 60% this fall. So that means that teacher's going to need additional support. So we're doing an assessment. We're asking our principals to talk with our teachers about what will your needs be to address what we know will be additional deficits that the average student may have in your classroom. And so a lot of it's going to come down to the professional development training, the tutorial, sort of the extra mentoring time, all those things that we normally do. We just may have to do more of it because we know that the challenges are going to be increased.
Quickly,
I like the preschool question.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
And then the questions we don't get to, we can make sure that we connect Kevin and his team with our folks. Because I know there's also a couple of comments about teacher education programs and whether or not you are the only one. So I want to see that debate offline. But
so what should online preschool look like, Kevin? Specifically with age groups that cannot independently access and balancing parental responsibilities when in quarantine?
Yeah, I think that one good thing that we do, which I'm proud of, we send computers to every kid in our program, and we also offer training to parents or the guardian who is a learning coach, who helps work with the student as they work with the teacher in the classroom. And preschool is more challenging, but what we do is we make sure we have smaller classes, if you will. We also make sure that we have smaller blocks of time that the kids are actually online. The way I would sort of characterize it is, for elementary school kids, particularly younger kids, You want more actual book time where they're actually being read to or you're reading, and less computer time. For the high school kids, you want the reverse. You want more computer time and less book time because they're more self-starters and they can absorb it better. So we have a whole structure in place for our early grade kids to make sure that it isn't just a situation where they're sitting in front of a computer and we're expecting them to magically learn. You still have to engage in some of the best practices that the best practitioners offer in the brick and mortar setting.
And Jeannie, we can't let the former council member escape without a political question. Kevin, what are your thoughts on the Biden-Sanders Education Unity Task Force that has no parent representation and absolutely no one with expertise in online and remote learning?
Wow.
Well, they should yes, I agree. They should have those things. But, I also think my concern about all of this, and I see my young friend Ethan Ashley there. Look at him, looking all young and raw and ready to change the world. I love it. And Dr. Lewis, nice to meet you virtually. I think that you've heard me say this, and I mentioned the two New Orleans gentlemen for this reason. We've got to figure out a way to make sure that our education policy is not shaped by the politics of the day. I say this over and over and over again. And when I look at the Biden-Sanders Education Task Force and look at who's on it, that was a political task force. It was not put in place to reflect what are the best educational practices that work for children. And I think that, so I don't want to just go off on a tangent and say that, you can make sure you have this person on, that person on. But what I do think that the mindset behind our approach to education nationally has been more focused on a political perspective as opposed to a nurturing what's best for kids perspective. And I thought the Republicans were the same thing and the Democrats. So the thing I don't like about that task force is you get a who's who of political education, talking heads, and you put them on there because you're checking the political boxes as opposed to checking the boxes of what makes learning best for kids. And that is a problem. And I think that if you're thinking about what's best for kids, particularly with this crisis, then you're going to be looking at not just online learning, you're going to look at, what's going on in school district classroom, where would they need support for the growing deficits of kids. And you're going to get people who are at least knowledgeable in those areas who can speak to what the government policy should be to support kids and families that are distressed in the wake of COVID. So I just think that the whole political aspect of education sausage making is fundamentally flawed. And, I think then we're going to continue to have challenges until we're honest about that.
Such a great ending comment for you, Kevin. But before we let you go, Dr. Lewis and Mr. Ashley, welcome. And I'm going to give you a proper introduction in just a couple of minutes. But as is our custom, we like to bring on our second round guests to interact for a couple minutes with our first round. And I'm wondering, now that I know a couple of you know each other, you're just meeting, what do you good folks from New Orleans have to ask maybe Kevin or pose to him to think about?
President, you want to go first?
Well, yeah, I want to just start by saying it's so good to see you, dear brother. And I'm not surprised by the work that you're leading in this time and in this moment. I think there is a lot to be said, and you touched on it a little bit, about the trauma and poverty piece that plays in the outcomes for young people during this time in districts, thinking about how they're able to respond. Is there more that you would, think to say about the trauma and poverty and how it impacts learning in this moment longitudinally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And by the way, Ethan, I'm so proud of you, man. I mean, when you're king, can I be on your court, man? Can you just give me, a little job doing something for you? Um, so this issue of trauma and poverty and how it affects learning is huge. The brain science is about this is clear. I am pushing all of our schools. I think each and every school in America should be a trauma-informed school. Every staff person in every school should be trauma-informed. What does that mean? There are certain certifications and designations associated with taking classes so that you know how to engage, teach, and work with kids and families that suffer from the trauma associated with poverty and associated with chemical abuse and challenges, and those who are socially and academically at risk. And I think that this is now become an art form. And I think that, my goal is to have every one of our school leaders and schools trained in that way. Because studies show that kids who come in with these deficits, how you engage them matters in terms of whether or not they stay engaged. So if you have a kid who's 2 or 3 grades behind, and we do what we do now, we teach and reteach and we test and retest, because we saw that kids who come in 2 or 3 grades behind, you give them something that's supposed to be a grade level and they don't pass, and you say it's an F, that further destroys their confidence. So we say, oh no, you got these 3 right, it's something to build on. You know what, guess what? Let's go over this again and let's take it over again. And it sounds simplistic, but when you're talking about kids who suffer from the challenges of poverty and trauma, these things and these approaches are huge, especially when their whole lives they've been told they're failures. And I am amazed at how many teachers in the classroom who are well-meaning don't understand that even by raising your voice an octave or more or higher than what it should be could send kids away. And so we have to just be aware. And I think that's a huge first step, particularly now, because there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety. That these are the steps we need to engage in to at least make sure that we create an environment so kids are more open to hearing from teachers.
Amen.
Dr. Lewis.
Yes, and Kevin, first of all, it's so nice to meet you virtually here today. This was a very impactful piece that you shared with us this morning. And even as we are looking in the school district to go through the assessment phase, a lot of things that you say just echo, and it's very in line with what we're doing here in New Orleans, as far as even our task force is a task force of practitioners. School leaders, principals, parents, students, and the list goes on and on, medical directors, so that we can be prepared, because I believe, just as you stated earlier about moving forward, this is going to be a blended model no matter what. We're not going back to what was. But really want to hear more about the schools or district that you've worked with that may have had platforms already in place, the deep challenges that they're still recognizing as far as the gaps when it comes down to making sure our students in special education, that they're getting the services and support that they need, so that we can give them, the education at the end of the day that they so rightfully deserve. So we definitely want to hear more about that.
Yeah, and it's great to meet you virtually as well, Dr. Lewis. I mean, my heart goes out to you. You got a tough job, but you're the man for it. So
thank you.
Ethan knows I have a lot of friends and done a lot of work in Louisiana, New Orleans in particular, and you've got some great opportunities. I will say that in terms of your planning and going forward, I think the first order of business is to allay people's fears. There's this image of virtual education that was sort of propped up by people who initially opposed it, that it's not real education. Mm-hmm. And so to create a mindset of what's possible is really important. And I would urge you and your task force, not to talk to us per se, but to get examples, look for and ask people examples of a effective classroom, virtual classroom experience. And we had this math teacher in Arizona who a couple of teachers got sick. This was a year or so ago. She ended up having like 150, 200 students in there, and they all did well on the test. And I sat in her classroom and I saw how she was able to navigate from screen to screen and how she put on costumes. And it was as entertaining a class as you would ever get in a brick and mortar setting. And I walked away. Now, look, I've been doing this a couple of years. And I'm saying, wow, I didn't know it could be so much fun watching someone do this on screen. So I think exciting the possibilities around what is already happening, using artificial intelligence, virtual reality. I think that exposing people to that and actually seeing kids respond to that, I think is a huge first step. Secondly, I think that in terms of your infrastructure preparedness, you've got to talk to a number of different folks. Now, when we work with school districts, the expression I use, people don't know what they don't know. So, if you haven't had the virtual education experience and you're a superintendent or a school board member and a friend of a friend tells you, you should talk to so-and-so, and they're good at sales and you get them in there and then the platform breaks, or whatever, it crashes. I think that what we do is we try to understand what their existing apparatus looks like. And we actually have helped prepare to train teachers who work in the school district. More and more we're working to train teachers in the school district, not our teachers, on how to make that transition, because I don't think it's going to work. I think the best way for it to work is to have a commitment to train as much as your staff on online education as possible. You can't rely on other folks. You have to.
Yes.
That's part of the mindset shift.
No matter what.
No matter what, you got to get them, because what happens is you train some of the right folks, they become your internal leaders and advocates, and I think you'll get there.
And Kevin, you've been just so fantastic, and you've both validated and concurred with a lot of our previous guests about the importance of training, about just staying on it. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being such a good steward. And feel free to stay with us and watch in the background. Let me give a proper introduction. So we'll see you later, Kevin. Welcome back, everyone. God bless you. So Dr. Henderson Lewis, as you can see, and just the little bit you've heard, is just a super rock star. He's a superintendent in New Orleans, been there 5 years. Prior to that, he ran and supported and was a founding principal in the Algiers Charter School Association. And I had the great pleasure of just meeting him recently. And I'm so delighted that you're spending time with us today, Dr. Lewis. Ethan Ashley, who you've also just met, is board president of the Orleans Parish Board. As you can see, I surround myself with really talented people today. And originally from California, but ended up in Washington, where I suspect you met Howard Kevin through the Howard University connection, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Me and his son actually went to law school together.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for spending the time with us. I kind of feel like you've had the double whammy. You not only represent a city where you had a hurricane and had to restart, but you're kind of having to restart again, if you will. So let me first start with you, Dr. Lewis. Give us a kind of an overview of, I think it's the 78 schools that you run, and kind of what happened between sort of, not that you've ever had business as usual in NOLA, but kind of what was the difference between business as usual and then post-COVID?
Yeah, certainly. And you're correct. Junior, we have 78 schools that serve 45,000 students in our school system. And prior to March 13th, it was business as usual, where in our district, we have great leaders who run schools every single day. and they know their students and they do what's best by their students. But right before the 13th, I started to reach out to our school leaders to say that, you know what, we have to be prepared just in case COVID-19, because it appears it's coming our way. So we have to be prepared. And so we had those immediate conversations to talk about, one, if the school building is closed, what are you going to do? And so started the preparation of preparing for online learning, as well as in the initial week, some schools were able to prepare packets, but we were ready for that first day because what we had to do overnight was turn the switch. And by that first Monday, we were able to have all of our students still engaged in their education, teachers doing amazing things from day one. So there's always a shout out to our school leaders and our teachers and our parents who became teachers in a different way overnight. But then as a school system, when things were normal, kids come to school, we have breakfast, we have lunch, we feed them every day. Well, as a school system, we made it as a priority that, guess what, we're gonna make sure that we feed them. And so by the first day, we had feeding sites open. By midweek, we had over 40 sites, which made it easy for our families to get breakfast and lunch for our young people. So our school system wanted to make sure from the very, very beginning, it was two things: a continuity of learning and a continuity of service in a time where it seemed as though everything else just went away for them. And so a lot of great work. And then from our school board, we had a school board that on the day the governor passed an executive order, did an action to allocate $5 million to make sure that the school district was able to respond to COVID-19. And as a result, we were able to procure 10,000 laptops for our students and 8,000 hotspots based on what our schools told us that they needed for their families. So again, we had a lot to do in a very short period of time, but I will say that a little over a week of planning time really helped us to get to this point. And Gina, you mentioned, we've been through different things before, Katrina, now COVID-19. We have a very, very resilient community. And as we prepare for the upcoming school year, we know that we're going to be prepared in this new model of learning in our school system, which will be a blended model moving forward. So again, a lot of work, a lot of great leadership from our school board to our community, to all of our school leaders to make sure it happened for our young people. And so we're proud to say that the school year for our kids are over. And now we're doing the planning and the work that's necessary to have a very strong start to what we will say will be a very unusual school year, because it will be like no other that we've had in the past.
It's really amazing, and resilient is absolutely the word I was thinking about. You know, I'm struck, Ethan, when I go and think about the fact that our friends in the media who are doing a lot of hard and really good work covering the stories. I think I mentioned to you all after the dear Senator Mary Landrieu introduced us, like, why hasn't this been covered? I mean, if you really wanted to understand and be able, and maybe it's just they don't understand it, they haven't seen it, no one's told them, maybe this step will help. But if you really want to know what it takes to get folks from 0 to 100, you go where they've done it, not just before, but they're doing it again. So Ethan, how does that, like, in your head, kind of what are the real qualities or the things that you have that you could share with others that got you to that point?
Yeah, so, you know, I think I'll start by saying that I have the ultimate pleasure of serving with 6 colleagues who I believe are the right leaders in the right time in this moment. And so, you know, while I'm board president, I speak on behalf of the 7 of us as a whole, and I don't believe that I'm doing it on my own at all. And then, of course, we have the superstar, rock star superintendent who, you know, is a practitioner himself, right? He came from the classroom. He was a math teacher. He became assistant principal. He became a principal. He was a superintendent in a district before the current district he's in, a superintendent. And the other thing that most people don't know is that he was also an elected school board member, right? So you're sitting here with someone who has a really good sense of how to manage a system well. And then I'm sitting with colleagues who, you know, we have dealt with in, you know, I think you've said it well, trauma from whether it's Katrina, or just trying to get our system back into one whole place. And so, I think we were prepared, and many of my colleagues had different strengths, and we were using those strengths to be able to meet the challenge of the day. And what I'll say is, some of my colleagues were really good on the fundraising aspect and wanted to make sure immediately that they started to hit the ground to call their friends about how can we ensure in the immediate response when there was no, CARES Act or anything like that, that we're able to, figure out how to provide for our students and educators. And so some of my colleagues were on the ground calling, and we became like a working board in some respects, which, I think many folks would say, there's a line between governance and management. But when you are in a crisis, you understand that, if you can add to helping out in this situation, you have to do so. And I think, my history, I'm an attorney by trade, and then I started doing state and local advocacy and policy. So I was doing a lot of interfacing with our state legislature and our governor's office to figure out how can we ensure that in the time that we need in this state of emergency, that we're able to meet as a board, continue to conduct the business that's necessary, while we know that there's a lot of stuff that may prohibit us to do so moving forward. So I think it was a collective effort. I will tell folks that being able to respond to an emergency and understand that students is definitely, and educators are first, parents and making sure that they're whole and they get all the information that they need is next. And so, making sure that you have a game plan around that is important. And I think the other thing is we took a step back and we figured that, in this new norm, we got to give parents, students, educators more time to deal with issues. And so our board really took it upon ourselves to make sure that we were getting out information about the things we'd be dealing with earlier. We were also very clear to say that business will presume we will not let this pandemic take us out as a governing body, and we will continue to do the work of the people. And I will end by saying that I believe, and we've had the opportunity to interact with our media. And I will say that our media is struggling, like many of our workers in this time, because ads are down, and so a lot of our media is actually furloughed in this moment, working once a week, and it's so we're hearts, our hats off are with our hearts are with them, and they're doing the work that they can, but it is incumbent upon us. I'll tell you, I don't think Doc does it for the write-ups, and I certainly don't. And so, being able to have this time to be able to tell our story is important. So thank you for this platform.
No, thank you. And you've just made so many great points about, how you get to resilience, but also about, the context that we're in. And you're right, there are a lot of people out there that don't have the luxury of like waking up and doing the articles every day. Question that comes off of what Ethan just said, Dr. Lewis. So you have all of these different schools. I think most people probably out there today know New Orleans is a majority charter. Is there a set of tools? And, Ethan asked Kevin Chavous earlier about trauma, but is there a set of tools and resources that you're providing or using centrally, or is it all decentralized in the individual schools? And to what extent can you call out sort of things that are working best? Either one of you, but certainly wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so certainly, as we have our decentralized district, it's a very, very unique opportunity when you're in the midst of a crisis. Because on a day-to-day basis, when things are normal and you have our 38 charter management organizations, they are working with the students and using their model that's working for their organization. But what was very unique about our system when COVID-19 happened, those 38 organizations were able to look at what was working within their schools. But as the district, being the one that can receive all the information, we were able to actually categorize all information and actually put it on a shared drive. So if you were looking for information around third grade math, then you were able to go because my school put the information there. This school over here put their information. We organized it for them to save time. As a district, we knew that we had to communicate with families. So as a district, we put sample letters, for example, in this resource tool for our schools to use. When it comes down, we've heard about mental health and those things there. We categorize whether it was telehealth or what have you, so that your services could continue to have those resources. And so we wanted to create a one-stop shop for our schools to be able to see what resources. And actually, Jeannie, what we did was we shared that information with all districts in the state of Louisiana, because again, at the end of the day, as board president Ashley stated, that we're about the work. And we were fortunate here in New Orleans, and I'm very, when I say this, I mean this from the bottom of my heart. The city of New Orleans led in the state of Louisiana when it came down to COVID-19 with our immediate response, whether it was the feeding or the educational resources being provided for schools to understand how to continue the learning of our young people. So that has been a huge piece. Again, as I mentioned earlier, our gap truly has been to continue to understand how we support our students with special needs. And that's a lot of training that has to happen, not just with special needs over the summer, but really to give our teachers a training if we want them to be stellar online instructors, that we have to provide them with the resources. And so we're now transitioning from those things that we felt worked, and now whether it's my school leader calls or the task force that we're going to be moving forward with, is an opportunity to bring those things up, to be able to talk what worked in certain situations, because then that's going to help us as we're in the assessment phase right now to actually have our model moving forward, and then our unique schools still will be able to take all that information and then make it uniquely there for their 38 organizations and carry out the mission of the district here in the city of New Orleans. So again, a very different setup, but we always want to come to the same end in mind as any traditional district, and that's the best outcome for young people.
I think New Orleans looks a lot like the model that people are envisioning for the future, because you do have these individual, largely autonomous charter networks that have largely autonomous charter schools under them, and you're the bridge, right? In my estimation, my bias is never hidden. Superintendents are supposed to be the bridge. They're not supposed to be everything. They're not supposed to be the dictator. They're not supposed to be the ones who tell you how to spend Title I funds or how to handle special needs. They do exactly what you said, which is let's surface where the issues are and let's address them. So let's talk about that in the future, right? So if we look to the future and you think about the conversation earlier we're having about the fall looking different, then that fifth grade math teacher may wake up one day and be infected, or the whole school may have to make a change. Are we looking at a set of, varying block schedules, if you will? Are you thinking about community organizations? Are your different networks and charter schools in a position to expand? Kind of, how do you help us all get ahead of this so we can put something in place before it happens?
Yes, a few things I'll say to react to that question and comment. The first is that as we continue to get guidance to our schools, we're planning for various scenarios. We know that students will be possibly partial in school buildings part of the time, and then at home. But even when they're in school buildings, we know if you have 25, like we heard earlier today, we're used to having 25 or maybe 30 kids in the classroom because of social distancing. That is going to probably change. And so being able to look at how do you have alternate schedule where some students may go to school on Monday and Wednesday, some on Tuesday and Thursday, or platoonists, some students in the morning, some students in the afternoon. We're working through all those scenarios with our schools right now, and also we'll be working through with our task force. But even the example you gave around an outbreak in the school, that's why as a district, we are bringing on a medical director, because like COVID-19, and the governor went ahead and said, okay, all school buildings must close, right? Well, you may have a situation in your district. Again, we have 78 schools. We may have an outbreak at a particular school. And so we have to be able to prepare to be able to respond to that in a very thoughtful way that protects students, protect the employees, and also give the parents the reassurance that they need during that time. And so the medical director will be able to work directly with that school if we have a one-off situation. And so again, we're looking at rethinking public education in New Orleans when it comes down to this new crisis that we're in, but we just don't want to be reactive. Mm-hmm. In New Orleans, I give you a great example. We spent the last 3 years actually working towards the implementation of high quality curriculum so that we can actually move the needle forward so that our students could actually meet the outcomes that we expect for them to meet. What I'm sharing with school leaders right now is that just like we did that, we have to now put the investment in our teachers around remote learning. The difference today is the window to work with teachers is very, very short because they're going to have to be able to respond by the start of the school year this fall. You can take any excellent teacher that you know that's out there and have done great work. Now they're having some struggles right now because they want to be that same proficient teacher that they always have been. So we have to now equip them with the resources. So now as we convert to this more blended model, that they can be successful as well. And so again, a lot of time is being spent with our school leaders to make sure that as we work on our plan, that our plan actually have the teacher and the training as one of the top priorities to make sure that they are prepared to educate our young people.
Well, it's like any workforce, right? You have different roles. If someone suddenly gave me a different role tomorrow I'd never been prepared for, I have to a certain extent, start over. Sure, I may have some skills that shift, but whether they're hard skills, soft skills, I need someone to help lead me. And I think all too often, we don't want to say you don't have those skills. We see it as a deficiency. It's not. It's a different role, right?
Right.
Ethan, how does the school board react to this? And are you getting, as board members, I would imagine, lots of comments, complaints? Are you getting emails? Are people saying, what are you doing for, Joe? And what are you doing for Ethan?
So that's a great question. I'll tell you that our community in this moment are, I think, dealing with two things. One, we know what trauma, we have dealt, we're a resilient city. So we've dealt with trauma and different disasters. And so we come together in moments like this. And that is phenomenal. It's people over politics right now, which is great. Our people are definitely trying to support the district as much as possible because we know that this issue is not just an education issue, like it's a community issue, right? And so I'm watching a lot of folks respond to us in a positive way to the extent that they can. And I think as a district, we are thinking about and trying to make sure that we are staying on top of our duties and make sure that we're not derelicting any of our duties in this moment. And that includes, making sure that we are doing all that we can to evaluate our superintendent during this time. In fact, we have done work to actually change his evaluation standards as a result of COVID because we will not have state testing. And we want to be able to be responsive to the things that he is doing well in this moment and hold him accountable for those things. I'll tell you that for us, communication to parents, families, our educators is key. And the next thing in priority is making sure we get all the money that we can as a district for our district. And then after that is making sure that there's policies in place to make sure that we are doing what's necessary to keep our families and students and educators safe and healthy. We have to make sure that we're fighting the digital divide, and then, you know, making sure that we're effectively budgeting and putting policies in place to mitigate any potential negative impacts to student outcomes as a result of loss of revenues, right? And so these things are things that we're looking at as a district, as a board, and it's in lockstep with the work that, you know, Dr. Lewis and his team that they're leading, and us as a board, we're trying to make sure that we're codifying the things that are working and that we're keeping our eye on the ball to hold everyone accountable in this moment.
And so on that accountability note, how do you make sure that every school is reaching students in two ways? One, not just about in-home Wi-Fi, but two, those people who aren't reaching the kids, how are they reaching them? We had Pat Brantley on from Friendship in DC a couple weeks ago, and she said, you know, she laid out their approach to getting everyone in their entire system of 8 schools here. I think all but 23 were online and engaged, but people are skeptical of that. So how have you done it? Because you told me you got this covered.
Yes, and I thought Board President was going to jump in because I'm just going to move forward first. So as he mentioned about modifying my performance objective, one objective that they have put in place that I'm working on right now is for the upcoming school year to be able to say, not necessarily during this initial 9 weeks period that we had to initially respond to COVID-19, but now that this is going to be the new normal for us as a school system, as the superintendent and administration, how do we ensure that the contacts are happening with the schools when a student is not, if a school is not able to locate a student? You know, what process, we have a current process from the normal days, but moving forward, how is a school working to actually find that student and be able to reconnect with that family? And so that's a goal that the school board has set for me that we will be working, or I'll be working on to actually implement, so that as a school system, when we talk about the 45,000 students, that we're able to make sure that we know what percent of those students that are not connected and how do we reconnect them. And over the last 9 weeks, our schools have been very, very successful during this initial phase to remain in contact with our students. What I've heard from school leaders over and over, we have a very transient population. And we have students that, you know, they're at one school today, they may vanish, not appear at another school. And we have mechanism in place that we follow to try to track that student and family down. And that really is the one thing that I continue to hear over and over from our school leaders is the students that may have had irregular attendance before COVID-19 happened. And then almost during this time, they may have gone radio silence, and so it was hard. And so from the school district, we have individuals who may have gone to homes, the school leaders may have gone to homes to try to locate those students. And so that has been a challenge. And so we're looking at how do we strengthen that, knowing that we have some students that fall into that category. And now this crisis make it that much harder. And so again, from the board action, that's having me to do a plan, but then working with our schools hand in hand to be able to make sure that we don't lose students during this tough time, because the major task is, even when we have them present, we have to get them adjusted to a new way of learning. And if they're not present, it's going to be very hard to connect them and move them forward. And as you talked about earlier, to catch up with those gaps that may have come into play because of the last 9 weeks.
Michael, before you ask a question, go ahead, Ethan. I want to.
I just want to make sure that I'm able to also say this. This cannot be, in this moment, an education issue only. And what I mean by that is our students live in housing and in homes that, you know, and they are, and so in this moment, my job as board president is to work with the different governmental agencies and to hold them accountable too, to make sure that our students are receiving the services that they need and the safety nets in place to make sure that they are stable. Because, you know, all of our schools have become, you know, offices and spaces in our homes, right? Our homes have become schools. And so that is a thing where we got to make sure that that we can't just put this on the education world. We actually need to now work with other governmental agencies to say, we got to solve these issues of poverty. We have to solve these issues of housing insecurity. And so like these things now need to make sure that they are elevated for all of us to deal with, as now, you know, schooling is in a different place and we're trying to evolve. So it has to be a holistic approach.
And you have a lot of that, meaning you have a lot of housing insecure, you have a lot of issues related to poverty. My question is going to be, and then we'll let Michael jump in with the Q&A from the audience. I kind of want you to just tell us, is there a correlation for you? Because I know you've got a lot of high poverty schools. Those students that you can't reach yet, are they necessarily all the poorest of the poor? Because a lot of folks think if you're poor, it means you're not going to step up to the plate and learn. Is that true, or are you seeing lots of variations?
I would say it probably is going to be variation. I don't have a direct answer to that based on the data that we've collected. But a crisis like this allows many different students, based on no matter if you're poor or not, your response to it, because this was something that caught everybody off guard, you know, and even as we think of not even students in this moment, I'll just transition to employees for a quick second. And I've seen a variation in my employees because of challenges that they face during this crisis here. So I would say, even when it comes down to students, their economic status may play a part, but I think it's not just isolated to a group of students at all.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'd go on to say that, you know, we're still in the middle of the crisis. We're not on the road to recovery, although we are talking about being on the road to recovery, which means that people's families are still dying. Like people are still, you know, our rate of infection in New Orleans is higher than most places. And as a result, like the trauma of what folks are dealing with and how it manifests differently. You have students who look forward to going to school. You have students whose families have the means not to have to send them to deal with school in this moment, and they can, you know, go and travel or do whatever, and you know that they are okay. And so, you know, what I would tell you is that this is an ongoing issue, and it's manifesting differently based off of whether or not your parents got laid off this week, last week, 2 weeks ago, and all these things are playing a part. And we're just trying to be responsive as much as we can, not only to the educational needs, but to the human needs of our students and families.
That's great. Michael.
Great, and Ethan, that's great, because we had a question from Kim Scott as to how you were addressing the socio-emotional piece, which is always critical. It's something we deal a lot with in Washington, D.C. And then I'm going to combine two questions here, because you were just discussing the government's response. Eric Wilson has asked, Orleans Parish leadership, is there a role for private industry in assisting with adjustments, not just to school, but throughout? And then how are you utilizing the technology with remote learning, and what's been the biggest challenges in supporting those technology needs?
So
Dr. Lewis, you want to?
Yeah, I'll take the
whoever.
I'll take the private. Is there a role for private industry? Certainly. I mean, I think that to the extent that we are able to bounce back, there's a role for everyone, and we cannot not be cognizant of that and not take the supports from the folks who are able to be stable in this moment and help stabilize, you know, our district in this moment. And, you know, I think the difference between, you know, oftentimes in this moment, I've been in many conversations where we juxtapose this disaster to Katrina. But the issue that I would say is more devastating in this moment in that COVID-19 is for everyone. Everyone in the entire world is dealing with this shutdown. And so trying to get supports to a particular area, everyone needs those supports. And it's clear because when we ordered the laptops and the hotspots, it took a couple of weeks to get to us because there were so many people ordering these things in response to the need. And so certainly a place and space for private industry. I think there's a lot of stuff to learn from private industry. And as we think about making sure that we are having the right proper protocols and policies in place. Private industry deals with health and safety in ways that we have not really had to deal with health and safety around certain things. And so being able to get those issues, and then also just money, right? Like beyond, we got to make sure that we're able to secure the dollars for our students. And not just that, not just money in terms of the actual dollars, but money in terms of support in a time way. So time is probably the most valuable currency that we have. And so being able to have, not like private industry who have time to dedicate to these issues, whether it's think tanks with some of the issues that we're trying to troubleshoot, or whether it is volunteering in other capacities to support our district's recovery, we're going to need it for years to come. This is an economic blow that will last for at least 2 to 5 years. And so we're going to need a lot of support.
Yeah, and to that point, the question is, I guess this one for either of you, does your task force or leadership have a way to engage perspectives, thoughts, ideas from outside of the New Orleans, Louisiana area? How do you draw in those opinions, those products, those tools? And then have you found that online models and hybrid education has been accessible for poor students? Have you adapted those in any way to hit that particular subset of students?
And certainly just going back to the fact that the school district had to purchase 10,000 laptops and 8,000 hotspots, that lets you know that when it comes down to our students here in the city of New Orleans, there are challenges there. There was no internet utility in the home. And so that automatically lets you know that there is a gap there. And so as a school system moving forward, even from the state of Louisiana now, we've heard that the expectation is that all students have laptops and all students have connectivity for the upcoming school year. As I engage with the task force, outside of the task force, work that has already been happening, for example, my participation as a member of Chief for Change. And so I've been part of a lot of national conversations, and including if it's a topic of special education, then my special ed lead will actually join this working group, which is in my mind becomes a national think tank when it comes down to mental health and the mental well-being of our students. Would work with Chief for Change. There's another group over there, and then I have another team member. And so what we're going to be able to do is to bring those national conversations, and really ultimately what we're doing when we meet is talk about what's the problem. And that question that was asked earlier when board president actually responded to the first question, my response was going to be the gaps. That's really where we are right now, is assessing the gaps. When Kevin was on earlier, he gave a very great example. If you think before COVID-19 happened, and you think of a proficient teacher, he or she may assess what's going on in the classroom and realize that I have these 4 kids over here that I need to do something else with, and let me find a way to pull them to the side while I work with another group of students. And so the gaps that exist today is really that same issue, because the teachers, they knew how to do that in person. And so now, as Kevin described earlier with the teacher he gave as the example, now that the teacher's working with this little group over here, and then creatively like move over, and now it has to work with this group over here because there's a gap there. these students need this particular attention of this teacher because of this gap and be able to work with them. And so again, it goes back to the professional development that has to happen over the summer to support our teachers to be able to do the things that they are so used to doing in person now using these online platforms.
And part of and a lot of those gaps, it seems to me, based on a lot of these other conversations we're having, once you fill them, they can also address some of the issues that you both, and in particular President Ashley, have been talking about, which is students who are disconnected, people having difficulty, they're workers, they're trying to deal with the economic uncertainty. If you have a great school, we know this, whether it's in four walls or outside, the responsiveness, involvement, and commitment of the student and the families goes up, right? Yes. Way up. I mean, it's off the roof, off the charts, on the roof, whatever. My analogies are never good. But the point is, right, there's a correlation between doing schooling well,
yes,
no matter what your conditions are. And right. So I would just say you guys are being really humble, and I know that you're recognizing, acknowledging with great honesty and passion the deficiencies and the challenges of schooling and poverty pre and post COVID. But your schools, when they do really well, are doing well for the worst off kids. We've seen the data, we've seen the numbers, we hear from, we watch, right? And so I think we have to also remind people that part of this, if you will, exercise we all have to go through is also to show how you can overcome those barriers, even when the worst situations are in place.
That's exactly right. That's so fair. And, you know, I oftentimes, I have the opportunity to lead a network of elected school board members around the country supporting their leadership. It's an organization called School Board Partners. And I will tell you that if you were to take our students and our poverty level and the growth of our students over the course of their educational time, you know, I will tell you that we are definitely boxing above our weight class, and we are silent about that, and we're proud of that work. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's not perfect. So I think Dr. Henderson Lewis and I will always probably criticize ourselves more than not, because it's, you know, we know that we have a long way to go.
You know, it's funny you say that, because you ask any champion, multiple champions, they only remember the losses. They never remember the championships. They remember the punch that caught them. You know, Roberto Duran is the only boxer, I believe, to have won 5 championships in 5 different weight classes. So, Jeannie, I'm going to go ahead and just call them the Roberto Durans of thing. Everybody remembers Roberto Duran for the no mas, but they forget that he came back and won 3 more titles in 3 different weight classes after that fight. So it's phenomenal. But Jeannie, we're at the 12:33 mark, and I know we had a question of, could you hold the books back up one more time as well before we let our 2 guests
okay, we have Kevin Chavous', where we go? I'm trying to get into my camera here. There we go.
Down a little.
Yeah. Voices of Determination.
We're not getting it.
Anyway, we're not getting it.
We'll
Voices of Determination, a fine line, and an unfinished journey. And speaking of an unfinished journey, I hate these green screens. We have to fix it, Zoom. This is not a finished journey by any stroke of the imagination. And I and all the team at CER are grateful to you, Dr. Henderson Lewis, President Ethan Ashley, for joining us today, helping illuminate, educate, and motivate us around the country. And thanks to all who participated. We will be back in touch with you to connect you with questions. And listen, everyone out there listening who's still on, whether you are a school, a policy person, we see who else we have, media. I know a lot of your names. If I don't, I know your URLs. These folks need support, help, and we need to magnify the work. So think about that. And if you need to get in touch with them, we can put you there. So thank you so much.
Thank you all.
And Jeannie, one more thing. We will not be back the Tuesday after Memorial Day, but we will be back that first Tuesday of June.
We will. Exactly.
Yes.
With more exciting things. And thank you again. You guys can watch the recordings later. We will keep you notified. Have a great Tuesday and bless you guys. You are truly doing God's work.
Thank
Thank you
y'all.
so much. Thank you.